To understand the trajectory of the Walt Disney Company under Robert Iger, one must first dispense with the mythology of inevitable success. The central puzzle of this 15-year tenure is not how a thriving media empire grew larger, but how a legacy institution, showing clear signs of creative decline and strategic inertia, managed to navigate the most disruptive period in the history of media. In the early 2000s, Disney was a case study in incumbent vulnerability. Its stock had been stagnant for years, a reflection of a market losing faith in its capacity for growth. The animation studio, once the creative and spiritual core of the entire enterprise, had released a series of commercial and critical disappointments, from Treasure Planet to Home on the Range. These were not isolated failures. They were symptoms of a deeper condition. A more telling diagnostic was the state of its most critical partnership. The relationship with Pixar, the studio responsible for a string of global hits that propped up Disney's consumer products and theme parks, was publicly and acrimoniously dissolving. According to Iger's own account, the internal culture under his predecessor, Michael Eisner, had become centralized and risk-averse, leading to a palpable brain drain of creative talent. The company was structured for a world that was rapidly ceasing to exist, a world of scheduled television, physical media, and limited distribution channels. It was on a collision course with a future defined by the internet, on-demand consumption, and globalized audiences. The question was not one of optimization, but of survival. While the story of Iger's tenure is one of global strategy, its foundational ethos was forged in a far more granular environment. Decades before boardroom negotiations for multi-billion-dollar acquisitions, a specific operational code was being developed within the high-pressure production trucks of ABC Sports. Iger's mentor, the legendary television producer, Roone Arledge, operated on a set of principles that would later scale to govern a global media conglomerate. Arledge's method, as Iger documents it, was a synthesis of technological innovation and narrative perfection. He pushed his teams to use technology, slow-motion replay, satellite uplinks, handheld cameras, not as a gimmick, but always in service of telling a more compelling human story. Working on broadcasts like the Olympics, Iger learned the practical mechanics of meticulous preparation, where every contingency had to be anticipated. He recounts his role as a young production assistant, where a failure to check the smallest detail could have cascading consequences on a live international broadcast. This environment instilled a deep respect for the creative product and the operational excellence required to deliver it. It was here that the abstract leadership qualities of thoughtfulness and the pursuit of perfection took on concrete meaning. This early career was not merely a biographical footnote. It was the crucible where the core tenets of his future leadership style, a bias for preparation, grace under pressure, and a focus on quality, were systematically ingrained. Before any strategy could be implemented, it had to survive a trial by fire against the company's own entrenched interests. The Disney succession battle of 2004-2005 serves as a crucial case study, not in corporate politics, but in the practical application of a new vision against an established order. The Save Disney campaign, led by Walt Disney's nephew Roy E. Disney and his financial advisor Stanley Gold, was more than a shareholder revolt. It was a powerful external pressure test that exposed the deep fractures within the company. Iger's campaign to secure the CEO role was not one of mere ambition, but a methodical exercise in demonstrating a viable alternative to the status quo. In his book, he details the deliberate and rigorous preparation for his interviews with the board. He developed a concise 45-minute presentation that did not shy away from the company's significant weaknesses, its creative anemia, its technological timidity, and its strained partnerships. Central to his argument was a contrast between the existing top-down, centralized management style and his proposed strategy of decentralizing power and empowering creative leaders. A key action that distinguished his approach was his decision to proactively seek out and listen to the company's most vocal critics, including Roy Disney himself. This was an early application of what he would later codify as the principles of fairness and curiosity. The board's eventual decision to appoint him was therefore not a leap of faith, but a data-driven choice for a leader who had already demonstrated a fundamentally different, more transparent, and more strategic operational model. With the leadership question settled, the first pillar of the new strategy could be articulated, and its logic was grounded in the shifting physics of the media landscape. The core proposition was that in an emerging age of infinite content and consumer choice, the only sustainable competitive advantage would be high-quality, branded content. This was not simply a call to make better movies. It was a calculated economic and psychological bet. The theory posited that as the sheer volume of media proliferated across new platforms, trusted brands would act as powerful filters and navigational aids for consumers. A brand like Disney or Pixar or Marvel would signal a certain level of quality and command a premium in both attention and pricing power. This principle became the central axiom from which all subsequent strategic decisions would flow. The primary evidence supporting this diagnosis came from within the company itself. One only had to compare the cultural and commercial performance of Walt Disney Animation Studios against that of Pixar during that period. The diminishing box office returns and fading cultural relevance of Disney's in-house animated films stood in stark contrast to the unbroken string of critically acclaimed, commercially successful, and culturally defining films produced by Pixar. This internal data set provided a compelling, undeniable case study. It demonstrated that creative excellence was not a nice-to-have, but the fundamental engine of the entire Disney ecosystem, and that engine was sputtering. This diagnosis established the logical necessity for the first and most audacious move of his tenure. Just as critical as the content itself was the second pillar of the strategy, a fundamental reorientation of the company's relationship with technology. This involved a radical mindset shift away from the defensive posture adopted by much of the established media industry, which viewed digital distribution primarily as a threat to be litigated and contained. Iger's perspective, outlined in his strategic plan to the board, was that technology was not an enemy of existing business models, but the most powerful tool available to connect the company's creative output with more people in more places. The genesis of this conviction is traced to a specific observation detailed in his book. Watching his son interact with one of the first video iPods. This was not a moment of abstract market analysis, but a tangible insight into changing consumption patterns. The proof of this strategy came in the form of a landmark agreement initiated by a direct call from Iger to Apple's Steve Jobs within weeks of his appointment as CEO. The deal made episodes of ABC's hit shows, such as Lost and Desperate Housewives, available for purchase on the iTunes Store. This move was internally controversial, as it challenged the long-standing, highly profitable syndication windows that govern television distribution. Yet its strategic importance was immense. It sent an unambiguous signal to the market, to Silicon Valley, and, most importantly, to the employees within Disney that the company would no longer view technology as a threat to be managed, but as an opportunity to be embraced. The third pillar of the strategy was designed to address the geographic limitations of the company's reach and relevance, proposing a shift from being a multinational exporter of American culture to a truly global enterprise. The core of this idea was not merely about opening new offices in new markets. It was a more nuanced and complex challenge to transform the company's content and its physical experiences to be culturally resonant on a local level, while simultaneously maintaining the integrity of its global brand identity. This meant moving beyond a simple dub and sub model of content distribution. It required a deeper investment in local productions, the cultivation of local talent, and a willingness to adapt the company's most iconic assets to local tastes and traditions. The most significant and capital-intensive proof of this pillar in action was the decade-long project to build Shanghai Disneyland. Iger details his extensive personal involvement in every phase of the park's development, from initial negotiations with the Chinese government to minute details of its design. The guiding mandate for the project was that it must be authentically Disney and distinctly Chinese. This philosophy manifested in tangible ways, such as replacing the traditional Main Street USA with a large central garden, the Gardens of Imagination, which incorporated elements of the Chinese zodiac. This was not a superficial change. It was a fundamental rethinking of the park's layout to align with local cultural preferences for communal green spaces. The immense success of the park upon its opening served as a large-scale validation of the third pillar, demonstrating that deep cultural integration, rather than simple replication, was the key to successful global expansion. The acquisition of Pixar was the first and most critical test of this new strategic framework. The question at its heart was not simply why buy Pixar, but rather, how can a large, creatively challenged company acquire a smaller, creatively superior one without destroying the very culture that makes it valuable? The $7.4 billion deal was structured less as a conventional takeover and more as a symbiotic merger, designed explicitly to facilitate a reverse takeover of Disney's creative soul. The mechanics of the deal provide the clearest evidence of this intent. The first and most critical condition, demanded by Steve Jobs and granted by Iger, was that Pixar's leadership, specifically Ed Catmull and John Lasseter, would be given control over all of Walt Disney Animation Studios. This was an unprecedented concession, effectively handing the keys of Disney's most sacred division to the leaders of the acquired company. Further terms were designed to insulate Pixar's unique creative process, protecting its separate campus, its brand identity, and its famous peer-driven brain trust feedback system. The negotiation itself was an exercise in direct, unsentimental logic, a conversation between two leaders who, as Iger describes, shared a language of brand value and creative excellence. The ultimate validation of this symbiotic model came not from the continued success of Pixar, but from the dramatic creative and commercial resurgence of Walt Disney Animation Studios itself. Films like Tangled and Frozen were the direct result of implementing the Pixar development process within the Disney system, proving that the acquisition had successfully re-injected a vital dose of creator-led DNA back into the heart of the company. Having successfully revitalized its animation core, the next question became one of scalability. Could this same principle of protected creative autonomy work for a universe of characters far more sprawling and with a famously difficult steward? That question led to the $4 billion purchase of Marvel Entertainment in 2009, a far more contrarian bet. At the time, Marvel was not the industry's gold standard. It was an intellectual property house with a recent, singular success in Iron Man, but also a troubled history that included bankruptcy and a reputation for creative chaos under its insular and notoriously frugal chairman, Ike Perlmutter. The analytical puzzle for observers was why Iger believed the Pixar model could be successfully applied to such a profoundly different organization. Iger's thesis was the recognition of Marvel's vast, interconnected universe of characters as a deeply undervalued asset in an era of franchise-driven filmmaking. He saw the potential for a serialized storytelling model on a scale never before attempted in cinema. The key to unlocking this value, however, was managing the human element. The post-acquisition structure provides the crucial evidence of the strategy. Iger made the critical decision to surgically separate Marvel Studios, led by Kevin Feige, from the oversight of Perlmutter's broader corporate structure. This structural firewall, a direct result of Iger's difficult but decisive interactions with Perlmutter, empowered Feige to execute his long-term creative vision for the Marvel Cinematic Universe. The resulting string of interconnected blockbusters, generating tens of billions of dollars in revenue, stands as the ultimate data set validating the initial contrarian hypothesis. The 2012 acquisition of Lucasfilm for $4.05 billion introduced yet another variable. This was not a transaction for a sprawling library like Marvel, nor was it about absorbing a superior creative process like Pixar. Lucasfilm was the singular, monumental vision of one person, George Lucas. Consequently, the core of this deal was an exercise in the stewardship of a cultural legacy. The central challenge was not financial negotiation, but the human element of convincing a uniquely influential creator to entrust his life's work to a global corporation. Iger's approach, as detailed in his book, was a multi-year process of relationship building that preceded any formal offer. The conversations were not about valuation or intellectual property rights. They were about legacy, artistic stewardship, and trust. According to Iger's account, Lucas's ultimate decision to sell was predicated on this foundation of personal trust, a belief that Disney and Iger would be the proper custodians of the franchise. This trust was the deal's most critical asset. Immediately following the acquisition's announcement, Disney confirmed its intention to produce a new trilogy of films. This was a crucial strategic signal, communicating to both the market and the fan base that Lucasfilm was not being acquired as a static asset to be archived, but as a living universe poised for ambitious expansion. The architecture of the new Disney was now in place. Through three strategic pillars and three transformative acquisitions, the company had evolved from a traditional content producer into a modern manager of global mythologies. But how durable could any 20th century empire be against a force that respected neither brands, nor legacies, nor gatekeepers? After a decade of successfully executing this acquisition-based strategy, the narrative pivots to confront a new and fundamentally different kind of threat. The rise of subscription-based streaming services, led by Netflix, presented an existential challenge not to a single division, but to the entire economic architecture of the Walt Disney Company. This moment of recognition is best understood through the framework of Clayton Christensen's Innovator's Dilemma. The theory posits a paradox. Successful, well-managed companies often fail. Their failure comes not from incompetence, but because their profitable, established business models actively prevent them from embracing disruptive and initially less profitable new technologies. Disney's highly lucrative business was built on a series of carefully managed distribution windows. Streaming threatened to collapse this entire structure in favor of a direct-to-consumer model that was, at the outset, far less profitable. Iger recounts observing the accelerating data on cord cutting and the simultaneous exponential growth of Netflix. This data presented an undeniable trend. The first concrete and expensive action taken to confront this dilemma was the 2016 decision to acquire a 33% stake in the streaming technology company BAMTech for $1 billion, a move that puzzled many on Wall Street. It was, however, a clear signal that Disney intended to own and control its technological future, rather than simply licensing its content to a new generation of digital gatekeepers. Recognizing the threat was one thing. Acting upon it required a bet of commensurate scale. The subsequent decision to go all in on a direct-to-consumer streaming future represents arguably the most courageous strategic pivot of Iger's entire tenure. It necessitated the deliberate cannibalization of billions of dollars in existing, high-margin revenue streams. This strategy faced immense internal and external resistance, as it required sacrificing guaranteed short-term profits for an uncertain long-term gain. The execution of this pivot provided several key data points that demonstrated the company's commitment. First, Iger made the decision to terminate the lucrative content licensing agreement with Netflix, foregoing what he estimates was approximately $300 million in annual revenue. This was a clear and costly signal that Disney would no longer fuel its primary competitor. Second, the company committed to investing billions of dollars in the development of original content and the technological infrastructure for the new Disney Plus service. Finally, Iger announced a massive corporate reorganization that elevated the new direct-to-consumer division, fundamentally reordering the company's long-standing power structures. As he describes it, this was a moment of burning the ships, making the commitment to the new strategy irreversible. The launch of Disney Plus in 2019 was not merely a new product release. It was the culmination of this multi-year, company-wide re-engineering process. The $71.3 billion acquisition of 21st Century Fox in 2019 must be analyzed not as an extension of the previous IP-focused strategy, but as a direct and necessary escalation to compete in the global streaming wars. After the successful integration of Pixar, Marvel, and Lucasfilm, the logical question was why another massive, complex, and debt-heavy acquisition was necessary. The answer lies in a content audit of the competitive landscape. Disney needed a critical mass of general entertainment content to compete with the sheer volume and breadth of a service like Netflix. The Fox assets solved specific strategic problems. To broaden the company's appeal beyond families, they acquired the mature storytelling engines of FX and the vast 20th Century Fox library. To compete on factual content, they brought National Geographic into the fold. And most critically, by securing full control of Hulu, they finally had the platform to build a comprehensive, multi-pronged streaming service, directly challenging the competition across every content category. The bidding war that erupted with Comcast for Fox's assets served as a market validation of their strategic importance. The high price paid was a reflection of the consensus that in the new media ecosystem, scaled content libraries and production capabilities were the essential assets required to compete against the technology giants who were now Disney's primary rivals. To fully grasp the mechanics of this 15-year transformation requires moving beyond the sequence of strategic decisions to an examination of the leader's underlying operating system. This system is not a simple checklist, but a dynamic interplay of principles revealed most clearly under conditions of failure, pressure, and crisis. One core component of this system is an honest accounting of failure, not as a mark of shame, but as a source of high-quality data. The acknowledged creative turbulence following the Lucasfilm acquisition serves as a key case study. The underperformance of Solo, a Star Wars story, pointed to a significant challenge. Iger admits that the principle of creative autonomy, so successful with Pixar and Marvel, was misapplied, allowing too many films to be produced too quickly without the necessary oversight. This outcome served as a data point indicating that leadership formulas are not universally applicable and require constant adaptation. A second component of this operating system is a deeply ingrained belief in the pursuit of perfection. This operational philosophy echoes the standards set decades earlier at ABC Sports, yet it manifested on a global scale, influencing decisions as granular as those seen in the meticulous construction of Shanghai Disneyland. In practice, this is not about micromanagement, but about fostering a culture where the quality of the end product is the paramount variable, and good enough is seen as a strategic threat. The final and perhaps most crucial component is the ability to lead through acute crisis, when strategic plans are irrelevant. The methodology here is consistent. Lead with authentic human compassion, communicate directly, and then take decisive action. A primary case study is the company's response to the tragic death of a child at a Disney resort in 2016. Iger's first action was a personal call to the family, an act of human empathy that preceded any corporate response. This was followed by the decisive operational order to immediately implement new safety measures across the resort properties. This synthesis of analyzing failure, relentlessly pursuing quality, and leading with humanity forms the durable underlying code that powered the more visible strategic hardware of the acquisitions and the pivot to streaming.